So, good evening from the McNeil Room in the Rensselaer Union. I'm Sunny Saad with the RPI Debate Club, and I welcome you to the final debate for the office of President of the Union. We have two remaining candidates for President of the Union, Greg Bartell and Nick Dvorak. This debate is generously sponsored by Haris Khan of the class of 2011 and hosted by RPI TV. I'll take this opportunity to welcome our candidates to the stage. So I will take a minute to describe the format of this debate. We will begin with 3-minute introductions from each of our two candidates. During the remainder of the debate, I will ask questions to each of our candidates, and then aside from audience questions, which will be later in the debate, all questions must go through me. We will limit all candidates to 60 seconds for their responses. And I apologize beforehand, but I won't hesitate to cut you off if you get a little bit long-winded or starts to get a little bit of a bickering affair. We'll also allow rebuttals for 30 to 45 seconds to an opponent's response. During the second half of the debate, audience members will be allowed to ask questions to candidates directly. If this is a question that is inappropriate, I'll just say you don't have to answer that, and that'll be that. These questions may be asked to a single candidate or both candidates, but still the same 60 seconds per response, and if necessary, a 30-second rebuttal is allowed. And then finally, at the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will be allowed another 3-minute statement. So RPI TV, who's hosting our debate today, would like to thank UPAC Sound, UPAC Lights, and all those who volunteered to make this event possible. So without further ado, let's get started. So just for the sake of, we need to start with someone, we'll begin with Nick Dvorak and then go to Greg Bartell, and then we'll alternate who starts every question. So next question, Greg will start. So the first question, and we're going to start with Nick. In your own words, what is the purpose of the Rensselaer Union?
So before we begin, do you want us to do those intro
That
statements?
would be a smart idea. So let's do the 3-minute opening statement first, and we'll just start with you.
All right, sounds good. So as many of you may not know me, my name is Nick Dvorak. What I'm pushing for is productivity on this side of the union and making sure that clubs get the help they need and that they're being reached out to get all of the resources available to them. I'm pushing to get the job done. I come from a strong financial background and a wider range of different experiences and leadership opportunities. I was a varsity athlete here at RPI for 2.5 years, vice president of finance of my fraternity. I've done the administrative chairman job with UPAC Lights, prepared our budget through the e-board. And one of the reasons why I started to think about running for president of the union is I wanted to give back. For 3 years here, I've been blessed with meeting some of the best people I have ever encountered in my entire life. Being able to represent them and the entirety of the student body is something that absolutely astounds me, just as a concept. To stand as a person at the helm of this great institution of the union, the student-run union, and make sure that things are held to the highest standard of excellence, and to make sure that things are done right the first time, is something that I hold high pride in. With that, I have plans, and I'm always the man with a plan. A couple years from now, I really hope that a lot of them can be seen through. One of the big ones that I want to push for are things like 4-year plans for clubs, working on making sure that good financial practices and planning are done, having e-board reps meet with their constituents at least once a month at a minimum, getting to know not just the problems, not just the budget deficits or the things breaking, but the good. Whether it's a roller derby coming up by a club in the future, or Warpy's transmitter having a failing, I believe it's a safety cable, Greg? Is that what you guys, I remember Warpy was having trouble with their transmitter.
I'm sorry.
Regardless.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is if you just know the bad, all you're gonna have to deal with is problems. If you know the good, the bad and the ugly, you're gonna have the ability to make a good and well-rounded financial plan, and that's what's gonna bring this union forward, and it's what's gonna keep us afloat. It's going to make sure that this is a ship that will not sink. And that's why I'm running for PU.
Thank you very much. Greg, your opening statement?
I'm Greg Bartell. I've been WRPI's business manager for 2 years now, and I'm running for president of the union because I think I can provide some necessary outside experience to the position and provide a little bit of a different viewpoint than has been held by previous members of the position. I've learned good leadership skills and financial abilities in my time as WRPI's business manager, managing a 5-figure budget with a whole bunch of line items that people don't remember what they're used for, but if we don't have them, we're going under. You have to learn everything right as it happens. There's no time to study up in advance, and you've got to adapt to the position. And I believe that these skills are going to transfer over very well to the presidency of the union. I've got 3 main ideas that I want to bring in addition to all of the day-to-day work. I want to make sure that we have accountability in the e-board. I want to make sure that we're communicating well with students, and students can communicate to us however they would like, and that we provide a set of guidelines for future generations of students to be able to learn exactly what to do without having to depend on one person being there. The first thing is accountability. I want to make sure that we have an independent appeals board that functions as a subset of the executive board, but doesn't necessarily share all of its members, so that there's someone else to provide an external check, so to speak, on club budgets. When a club appeals, they currently have to go to the existing executive board, and I want to make sure that they appeal to this appeals board instead, so that there's a second pair of eyes looking at every appeal, making decisions, so that there's a check on the current executive board. I want to make sure that we're communicating with students and allowing them to communicate with us. I want to hold regular town hall meetings, as well as expanding our presence on Reddit, Facebook, social media. I will hold regular office hours as the current PU does. I'll give out my phone number if anybody's interested, so you can call me up and say, Greg, this is how I feel on such and such. And I want to make sure that no matter how you want to get your opinion heard, someone is going to be there to listen to it. I know I will, and I'm sure that the members of my executive board would as well. And then finally, I want to create a set of budget guidelines for incoming business managers and treasurers to learn how to do the job, what they need to do. This is how to make your budget look. This is how to submit it. This is how to appeal it. And if you have any questions along the way, these are the people to go to for advice. I want to make sure that we have executive board members that really are passionate about and fully understand the depth and detail required for managing club affiliations and budgets. So I want to make sure that club officers and activity representatives and fraternities are the ones that suggest their own executive board reps, so that there's a diverse view of opinions of very passionate people on my executive board, and it's not just the people that I personally think would be best, because I don't know about every single club. Every club knows best for themselves, and they should be allowed to have their representative chosen by them. And for these reasons, I want to be president of the union. I think that's the end of my time?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the first question, and that is, in your own words, what is the purpose of the Rensselaer Union? And we'll start with Greg.
The purpose of the Rensselaer Union is to allow students to indulge their passion and creativity to do the great things that they want to do. They pay in through the student activity fee, and then it's given back to the students in the form of clubs, of activities, of athletics, that allow them to do the things that they already want to do. The purpose of the e-board is to make sure that we can give that money back in the ways that benefit the most students in the most ways possible. And the president of the union's job is to have control over that and provide direction, but that direction comes from the students.
Okay, thank you. And Nick, unless you have a short rebuttal, we can move on to you.
Nope. So the purpose of the union is we are the embodiment of the students. We are the stewards that stand the test of student government. We are the student body, and the union is the physical representation of that. It is the clubs, it is the people, it is the athletes, it is all of us working together as one machine, promoting the great campus culture that we have created. Whether it's your passion through clubs, whether it's going out to compete every weekend in a sport that you absolutely love and devote your life to. The union allows you to reach your full potential by giving you that outlet, by giving you that expression. The union is the embodiment of the student experience.
Thank you very much. And then I guess for the sake of knowing when people want to have a rebuttal, you can just sort of say at the end of your opponent's time that, hey, I have something I want to say. But unless Greg has something to say, we'll move on to the next question.
I'm good.
Okay. So, if elected, what is your most important agenda item that you would like to have accomplished? And we'll start with Nick.
So the first thing that I want to see hit the ground running as soon as I'm elected is working with the e-board reps who are selected for my term and having the timetable set up for having them reach out to their clubs and set up monthly meetings at the minimum. This proactivity is, like I said, going to get them to know their clubs, know their constituents, and really have a fluid relationship so that they can work to create the best representative force and best financial situation that they could possibly provide. Whether it's going forward and knowing their events, whether it's talking to, for example, Snow and Ski-Board Club, knowing last winter they didn't have a lot of snow, so their expenses weren't as high as, say, next winter where we'll have tons of blizzards. Knowing that information is really going to make it well-rounded. I want to see that happen within the first month and then have it continued. Through that, making sure that it is upheld to the highest standards of excellency and that everybody is accountable for everything from the bottom up.
Thank you very much. Greg?
The question is the most important thing on my agenda?
Yes.
I believe that without a shadow of a doubt, the most important thing that I need to get done as the president of the union is make the next budget. I don't think that Nick wouldn't do that, but that is the focus of the job. You have to make sure that we create the new budget and that goes into effect so clubs are funded adequately. The most important new thing that I want to bring in is my idea of this appeals board. I want to make sure that there's this independent body, functions as a part of the executive board, hopefully without a constitutional amendment, so that we can make sure that all clubs get a second chance at their budget. If the e-board denies it, they don't have to appeal back to the e-board, which is the same group that denied it in the first place. There's a second pair of eyes on every appeal.
Hey, thank you very much. The next question, what previous roles and opportunities have prepared you for this position? And we'll start with Greg.
The most important financial side of the job is my term as business manager of WRPI. I've worked with the union, I've presented budgets, I've worked with our student activities resource person, our SARP, to figure out what we can do, how to manage our money the best. And I've learned a lot of important skills, both in terms of money and just learning how the union works in that position. In terms of leadership abilities, I debated all 4 years of high school. I went on to become a national semifinalist in congressional debate, and I learned how to win minds and influence people, how to present my opinions effectively, and how to communicate to a group, and I believe that that transfers over very well as to controlling a group like the executive board.
Thank you. Nick?
So a lot of the things that have prepared me for this role come from a wide array. Whether it's working in student athletics and being an athlete for 2.5 years, working as the vice president of finance for my fraternity, managing a 6-figure budget, working in industry and taking a product from the research and development side all the way up through production. I ran a business before coming to college. I understand how complex organizations such as this one work. I understand how to get into that nitty-gritty, how to properly manage a team. I've worked with dozens of individuals off of a wide latitude of different backgrounds. I believe I understand how to communicate properly, how to present myself professionally, and how to gain the respect of those that are above me. When I was in my internship last summer, I actually presented to the owner and CEO of the company I was working for. I had to present a new project that I had developed myself. And by the end of it, he wanted to offer me a full-time job. What I believe is that I have worked and that I have gained the knowledge and skills that are absolutely pertinent to this position, and it has prepared me to best represent the student body through a wide, diverse array of experiences and a unique set of tools. That's it.
All right, thank you very much. So then the next question, and we'll start with Nick for this one. What does being president of the union mean to you?
Being president of the union means being the one that people look to for guidance. The president of the union is not a voting member of the e-board. They lead the discussion within, and they allow for the proper budgeting, and they act as a guiding force. As the president of the union, I plan to communicate with all of my constituents as best as possible and be as open as possible, whether not just undergraduates, but speaking to athletes, speaking to clubs, speaking to the grad students, making sure, making sure that I get as many perspectives as possible, and that I'm able to fully represent as well as possible. President of the Union is a role that I believe is the true embodiment of the student body within one individual.
Thank you very much. Greg?
I believe that the role of the president of the union is, as Nick said, to provide guidance to the e-board, to make sure that he or she is listening to the student voices and making sure that union funds are being distributed to the activities, clubs, et cetera, that students want the most funding for, to make sure that students are the guiding force and that the executive board needs to fund things, but the president provides the guidance how exactly to go about doing it.
Hey, thank you. So we have a question from the audience, and it is, you both have very similar platforms. What sets you apart from the other candidate? And we'll start with Nick.
So what I believe sets me apart from Greg is that I've had the opportunity. I'm a junior right now at Rensselaer Polytechnic, and I've had that extra year of experience to gather myself and look introspectively to figure out who I am and what my strengths are. I believe that this has better prepared me for the position, as I'm going to be able to hit the ground running when I enter office, and then I'm going to be able to adapt to the situation as quickly and efficiently as possible with no hesitation, and be able to tackle the learning curve without any problem.
Thank you. Greg?
I think the biggest item on my agenda that sets me apart from Dvorak is the idea of the appeals board. I really want to just get across that I'm not running for the position because I want the power. I want to make the executive board and the union as a whole a better place. I want to make sure that students have checks on the power to make sure no one group is the final say on everything. I want to make sure that students are being heard, that they can understand that they can provide input to the e-board, and that really the union works for them instead of imposing their opinions onto the student body.
All right, thank you. Next question we'll have is, what is the greatest strength of your opponent's platform? And we'll start with Greg.
I believe that the strongest points of my opponent's platform are kind of the same points of mine. You know, he believes that students are the important guiding force of the union, and that we need to represent the needs of the students. Having e-board. Let me try that again. Having executive board members meet with club officers once a month is a great goal that I really hope to strive for. I don't know if once a month is realistic, because they have to meet, 12 clubs in a month is a little hard. But making sure that club officers meet with their executive board reps as often as possible is a great idea, and I hope to pursue it in my term.
Thank you. Nick?
Am I allowed to just comment on one thing?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to clarify. That is a point of confusion that has come up before. And the way I address it is, I understand that 15 clubs is a lot, and that e-board reps will know that going in. But the big thing is that it gives the clubs the chance to say, hey, we're doing all right. And it gives them the chance to understand that the e-board rep is there, reaching out to them. If there's no problem, there's nothing going on, that's fine. And with the multitude of clubs at RPI, I believe that a balance will be struck. Now, as for my answer to the question, I believe the biggest strength that's in Greg's campaign is that he has his heart in the right place. I believe that absolutely. He's pushing for the right reasons, and he's running in a passionate campaign. I won't deny that.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is there anything that you'll have to personally improve upon in order to become an effective PU? And we'll start with Nick.
So obviously I'm coming to this position from the outside. A lot of the times it hasn't really been easy gathering information, and there's always been roadblocks. Along the way, I've written down every problem I've run into, kept a journal, kept a log of all the information that's been hard to find. What I want to improve, at least for myself, is making sure that I know the right channels to swim. I believe I have a great handle on it already, but I always believe in continuous improvement. No process can ever be 100% efficient. That's just the laws of thermodynamics. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to strive forward.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
I believe that the biggest thing that I need to improve on were I to become president of the union is learning all the in and outs, day-to-day details of the operation of the union. I'm meeting with as many people as I can. I've met with the now former Grand Marshal, Kyle Correga, sitting in the back right there. I've met with the current president of the union, Aaron Amarello, the director of the union, Joe Cassidy, and I'm trying to learn everything from the high level, but that doesn't exactly translate to the day-to-day operations. And I'll admit that that is the first thing that I would do if elected, is to learn the job on the day-to-day.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, describe the role and the function of the President of the Union as it relates to the Executive Board, the student body, and the local community. And we'll start with Greg.
I feel like we've heard this question before now in a couple of different ways. Again, I believe that the role of the President of the Union is to provide guidance to the Executive Board and to be the unit of the students' will, that the students say, this is what we want, this is what we're interested in. And the President of the Union's job is to tell the Executive Board these things and communicate it to them. And the e-board representatives go out and meet with the clubs and activity representatives and make sure that they're distributing the resources we have in the best way possible to benefit the most people.
Okay, thank you. Nick?
The President of the Union is the eyes and ears of the student body within the Executive Board meeting. They're the ones that have taken opinions from the outside and make sure that they're being addressed. The President of the Union has to be open and listening to all that's going on whenever it's possible, making sure that they're aware of what's going on campus, what the opinions are. Because it's not possible for every undergraduate to attend every e-board meeting. They need to make sure that they are the liaison between the financial side of the union and the students, making sure that things are clear, palatable, and straightforward so that there are no barriers, so that there are no hesitations, that it's clear what's going on.
Thank you very much. The next question is, please explain the kind of relationship that you would have with members of the school's administration, including President Jackson. We'll start with Nick.
So at least for the administration within the union itself, they know me by face, they know me by name. I've worked for UPAC Lights for a couple years now, since freshman year actually, NRB. In terms of the higher ups, I believe that I can represent myself professionally as a mature adult and that I can gain their respect as they will gain mine. Everybody is a person in this scenario. There are no chess pieces, there are no pawns, bishops, or kings. We're people. I believe I can present myself that way, and they will see me as a respectable figure and be the voice of the students.
Thank you. Greg?
I'll admit that most of my experience is with members of the student community and of the union, and that's who I'd be working with the most. But there is definitely a desire to have open lines of communication with the administration. I'm told that the previous GM and PU met with Dr. Jackson for the first time in a couple of years recently, and I'm very happy that that happens, and I hope I'm going to have regular communication with them in the future. Because while there are a lot of things that I want to bring up, it's important that we build this line of communication so that there aren't any surprises when we bring larger issues up. One of the big issues I want to bring up is how exactly we need to split the funding of certain facilities-related projects between the administration and the union, because right now I believe that some of them are unfairly burdened on the union when they should be administration problems. And this is the sort of issue I would like to build up communication and respect with so that we can have these open discussions.
Okay, thank you. The next question, and this is from RPI, the RPI TV stream online, is typically graduate students are underrepresented on the executive board. How many graduate students would you plan or like to have on your executive board? And we'll start with Greg.
I don't have any quota for anybody on the executive board. If you can do good work, if you're passionate about the position, I want to have you on my executive board. I believe that it's a little bit difficult to have graduate students on the board simply because, you know, maybe they have a spouse and kids, maybe they're working a job in addition to it, they're doing research, and they don't have as much time as undergraduate students. And I believe all of us undergraduate students know that we don't have a lot of time to begin with. So it's important to have graduate students on there because they provide that perspective that as undergraduates we can't fully understand ourselves, but the idea of finding graduate students to fill those positions will be very difficult.
Thank you. Nick?
So when I've come from the HR side of this, I've worked to interview individuals for a position before, and what I've learned is that everybody can come to the table fair and evenly. If you have any inkling of representing your constituents, I absolutely encourage you to apply. Everybody gets a fair shot. Graduate students are absolutely not included. It's a perspective that's hard for a lot of students to grasp, especially from the undergrad side. I work with a lot of grad students in my labs over in biotech, and just hearing about some of their day-to-day struggles, it can be difficult. So I'm definitely and absolutely open to the idea of inclusion.
Thank you very much. Next question is, what do you see as the next major budgetary issue for the university, and how do you expect to handle it? And we'll start with Nick.
Just a little clarification. Do you mean the union specifically or the university as a whole?
We'll say the union.
All right, so for the union, one of the big problems that we're looking at right now is when you thumb through the UAR, the reason why the bookstore is currently not netting a positive gain. It's in the red. Its expenses are a bit high, and it's becoming a decrepit piece of equipment within the union. Now, going forward, we need to make a plan. Currently, there have been consultants brought in. I'm sure I've talked to Joe Cassidy about it. There's current plans in the works. I want to make sure that that's rectified and we put it on the right trajectory. Because having a project in the red that's only being covered because clubs aren't spending all of their subsidy doesn't scream balanced budget in my mind. I want to work to improve that, come up with new ideas, both inside and out, and fix the union to make sure that we're striking the proper balance to put us on the right trajectory.
Okay, thank you. And then a quick follow-up to that, since you mentioned the bookstore, what would this plan entail?
So one of my big plans right now is to look at what the consultants have to say, because this isn't a problem that's specific to RPI. Bookstores are a degrading aspect of student unions and campuses across the nation. Students are gravitating towards the digital, towards the cheaper options, and it's difficult a lot of times for institutions to step up and deal with that. Now, I have a couple plans in mind, possibly partnering with online orders such as Amazon, and something has been broached before about possibly Barnes & Noble coming in like what they've done with UMass Amherst or RIT. I want to make it clear that I am completely for an independent and student-run bookstore because we are the student union and we pride ourselves on running our facilities. However, I'm open to information, I'm open to ideas, and I want to get as much of a perspective as possible to properly address this.
Okay, thank you. And then Greg, back to the original question is of what do you see as the next major budgetary issue for the union and how do you expect to handle it?
Well, I think Nick touched on most of the right points there. Revenue is going down. The bookstore isn't bringing in as much money. Next year's freshman class will be smaller than the one before it, while still big, and that means fewer people to pay the activity fee. We have half the number of grad students today as we did 10 years ago, and revenue just keeps going down. At the same time, we have all these facilities to upkeep. We have clubs that need funding. We have activities that need funding. And we really have to learn to do more with less. While there are, I do of course have plans to increase the revenue we bring in, the most important thing is focusing on the services that students actually want and actually use, and cutting back on the ones that they don't, in order to make sure that we're meeting their needs most effectively. I want to look at every service and see, do students actually use this? If students are buying their books online, why still have the bookstore when we could be using that money to put it somewhere else? And I believe that this is the most important thing, just prioritizing the budget.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is, do you feel that students understand the importance and the impact of their activity fee dollars? And if not, what would you change so that they do? And we'll start with Greg.
I like to think that students understand the importance of their activity fee because it funds everything around them. You know, this building, all the clubs that they use, and all of that. They know that they're not just paying a couple $100 and it's going to go into someone's pocket. It's going right back to the students. And I want to make sure that every student understands that. That's one of the reasons I focus so much of my platform on communication. I want to make sure that students are able to say, hey, I paid in this money, it's going to things that don't interest me. This is how you can do it differently to benefit me. And make sure that all students are able to see that the money that they pay in goes back to them in a way that benefits them.
Thank you. Nick?
So when I was going around and collecting nominations for the position before GM Week, I actually talked to people about this. And what ended up happening is that I found out a lot of people don't really know where their activity fee is going to. A lot of people thought it was rolled in with tuition. And I believe that that is a problem. Now, the way I was raised, transparency, accountability, communication, those are all things that are given in a position of responsibility like this. They're things that I plan to build from the core of these experiences. One of the big things that I want to work to do is make sure that information about the activity fee, about where the money's going, is simple, palatable, and open to anybody. One of the things that actually came up during my interview with the Poly was creating a personal and simple cover page to the UAR that any student could pick up, thumb through, and figure out exactly what's going on. Keep it simple, make sure that it's straightforward, easy to understand, and easy to swallow.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the online stream, specifically for Greg. And it is, why should the appeals board have the final say in budget disputes when we are electing the PU to make those decisions?
The PU isn't really the one making the decision, to clarify. It is the executive board. They're the ones that hear the appeals. They're the ones that vote on it. So I don't see that the appeals board necessarily means anything different. It's just providing a second set of eyes. I assume that this appeals board would be headed by my vice chair to provide guidance, and that the original executive board would have a veto in the case of a particularly egregious mistake. I simply just want to make sure that club officers, when they submit their budget and they appeal them, know that they're getting a fair shake both times they submit their budget, that it provides some accountability and some checks and balances on the whole process, and I believe that it will increase student trust and faith in the process instead of decreasing it.
Thank you very much. The next question, and it's for both candidates, is ideally, how would you want the budgeting process to work? And we'll begin with Nick.
So for the budgeting process, ideally we'd be able to have about a month before it begins, starting after the activity fairs, having the e-board members, with my plan to have them meet with their clubs, start bringing up topics, start bringing out what's going to go on in the next year, what's happened in the past year, just figure out what's going on. Have that relationship going, have that fluid dialogue in the works. I want budgeting to be simple, and I want budgeting to be straightforward. I believe that one of the things that is easy to have this go down the rabbit hole and to cause issues is that things get overcomplicated. By starting the conversation early and starting the conversation clearly, I want the budgeting process to be not quite a rush all before winter break. I don't want clubs to be hammering their new treasurers or whoever they decide to label to deal with the finances, trying to clamor to figure out what exactly is going on. I know I stepped into that position with lights, with the admin chair previously having to step down, and I would have to figure out how to run the budget in about 3 or 4 weeks. Making sure that the conversation started early is going to allow clubs to properly plan and allow budgeting to go a lot smoother.
Thank you for your response. Greg?
I believe that the whole process starts with communication with the e-board reps. The club officers will be able to download my new set of guidelines. Here's how to make your budget, and they learn how to format it. But meeting with the executive board rep is the key focus. To communicate, these are the items we absolutely cannot operate as a club without. These are the ones we really want to see, and then these are our stretch items, so to speak. And that way, when the executive board presents it to themselves, they vote on it, which line items to approve, which ones to deny. They can really make a fully informed decision because they have all the facts in front of them. They have this budget that's presented in the right format. They have a knowledgeable person to vouch for the club and understands why everything is important, and they're able to present it fairly. If something does get denied that shouldn't be, they can go to the new appeals board and present it to them, and they can make sure that there's a second pair of eyes looking at it to serve as the check on the executive board's power. I ideally want to make sure that club officers know well in advance of the appeals deadline, because I know in the past couple of years it's only been a couple of days, and I want to make sure that students are aware of that so there's no surprise, hey, we have to get our appeal in tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from the online feed, and it is, in what circumstance, if any, would you ask for advice from the administration of the Rensselaer Union? And we'll start with Greg.
I believe that it's important to ask for advice on any situation where I'm unclear. The main thing that's important is understanding when to take that advice. Everybody in the union, everybody in the administration has their own goals and their own agenda. There are many very talented, very interesting, knowledgeable people, both in the union and the administration, but you have to understand what is their goal, how does it benefit the students, should I take their advice just because it was given to me by so-and-so, or do I give it because it's in the best interests of the students I'm supposed to represent?
Thank you very much. Nick?
So I believe that the people in the admin office, many of them are great resources and a great group of people. I know that a lot of them want what's best for the union. Now, no one's 100% objective. We're all human. With that, everything comes with a grain of salt. Everything needs a perspective. That's why we seek advice. And it's not just going to come from straight administration. Obviously, we want to talk to them. They've been here for many of them over a decade. They see what we as undergrads who are only here for 4 years can't see. But with that said, this is the student union. They need to understand the dynamic, and I know they do.
Thank you very much. Next question is, are there any of previous president of the union, Aaron Amarello's goals or platform that you wish to continue? And we'll start with Nick.
So I remember back last year, because I actually worked Erin's debate as well, one of the big things she pushed was trying to get involvement in student government. And I believe she made a couple good steps forward. And one of the big things I liked out of her campaign was the union website. I think it looks great. It's functionally pretty good. What I want to work with is making sure that the barriers to student government, especially from the e-board if I'm elected PU, are dropped. A lot of people are hesitant to get into finances because they see numbers, they see figures, and it can be intimidating. A lot of times you think you need to have a lot of prior experience to really figure out what's going on. That's not the case. We're smart people. We're engineers. I believe that any student can figure this out, and I want to make sure that they can walk into the e-boards knowing that they have a job ahead of them and exactly what they need to know, the skills they need to learn to get the job done.
Thank you very much. Greg?
I'm happy for this question because it allows me to correct a mistake I made in the previous debate where I mentioned that the food policy was one size fits all and I wanted to change that. And Aaron Amarillo actually contacted me by email during the debate to say, no, we're trying to get away from that. And I want to make sure that that's where we're going with the club food policy. I want to make sure that it's not one size fits all, that everything is handled on a case-by-case basis, and that the executive board really understands why clubs are asking for this money, how it intends to be used, and why they need that money there instead of in some other line item, instead of going to some other club for another purpose.
Thank you very much. The next question is, do you feel that the student union space is being utilized to its fullest potential, and why? And we'll start with Greg.
The space of the physical union building we're in, yes and no. I believe that most of it is being used appropriately. You know, we're having great debates. I love the McNeil room as much as anybody else. People study on the third floor all the time. The Rathskeller area, not so much. We're changing out food vendors this year. You know, the bookstore isn't bringing in as much money, and all of that needs to be reevaluated. Is the bookstore losing money because it doesn't provide a service students want? Do they want to just buy their textbooks from Amazon? Could we put something else in that place? I know that there's currently plans to look into putting a pharmacy in the union, and I think that that's definitely an interesting idea, if nothing else. If that's what students want, then we should try to put that in place. But I just want to make sure that everything in the union is being evaluated. Do students use this? Do students want this? Is this the best use of the space?
Nick?
So I've actually had the good fortune to have a nice hefty key ring and be able to walk around the union and check out some of the nooks and crannies that really don't see the light of day too often. And there's a lot of spaces in this building that really can be used for different things. There's offices that really are underutilized. There's those places downstairs on the first floor that really don't get a lot of attention. I feel that we'll be able to, that I'll be able to work during my term with the eBird, which is the Wii, to try and figure out how we can better utilize those spaces that just kind of lay dormant, lay empty. Work towards improving storages for clubs that need it so that they don't have to try and work with an external source or try and pack everything they have into one little closet. I know for UPAC, we work with a closet down in the basement, and it's always overfull. I want to make sure that clubs are getting the space that they need and that they're able to utilize the union to their full potential.
Thank you very much. The next question is specifically for Nick, and it is, what is your opinion on your opponent's goal to form a separate appeals board?
Well, this is something I've actually talked to Greg about a little before, and something that I voiced as a concern is where it stands with the e-board and where it stands as a check to the president of the union. I believe that the idea is great. I think that having a way for clubs to kind of get a different set of eyes on their budget, especially after being turned down for maybe a big purchase or a big line item, it's important. A lot of times when you see a big number from a financial side of things, you can get worried. You can say, how are we going to figure this out? Where's the money going to come from? Having another set of eyes is great. Do I believe that it would need to be able to overturn the decision? Not exactly. I believe that having a recommendation board or a task force to work with appeals that didn't quite go through is a great idea. But I don't think I would put it as a direct overturn to the president of the union.
Yes, Greg. can you
If I can
respond?
speak on this, because it's my idea. I believe that it is important to allow the appeals board to have the decision on the appeal, perhaps with the case of the executive board to unanimously override it if they really feel that the appeals board made a mistake. Because the executive board is invested in their original decision. They want to make sure to say that we did the right thing in the first place. And it's hard to look back and say, oh, I made a mistake. It takes a big man to admit his own mistakes, and it takes a big executive board to admit that they made a mistake. And sometimes it can't always be that way. Having an appeals board that's not invested in the original decision allows them to be a little bit more of the arbiter. It allows them to be a little bit more removed from the process. Unbiased, I think, is the word I'm looking for here. And allows them to have a separate perspective and what's going on in each club. What are the most important things? How can we prioritize their budget? And how does it compare in the scope of everything else in the union to fund?
So I think this is obviously a point that Greg and I both agree on. I know when I was the administrative chairman at with Lights, we had difficulty getting in touch with our e-board rep. It was difficult. They disappeared off the map for a while, and it was something that when I spoke to other members of the e-board, they kind of acknowledged as well. I believe that working towards proactivity with my plans is going to allow that to not happen. And if that does happen, if a member is not living up to their potential and not properly representing their clubs like they should, I have the experience. I've been there before. I understand what it's like to have a sit-down conversation with somebody and explain to them what's going on. Now, a lot of times it's possible that it could just be something in their life that's out of their control. Maybe it's something coming up in their personal life. Maybe their classes are getting hard. A lot of times it could just be that little switch, that little hitch in life that throws you off your game. Knowing that, having a relationship with the e-board reps and understanding what's going on can really figure out, how to correct the situation. And at absolute worst, I understand my job is to make sure that the union is secure financially. I can have a serious conversation. And if somebody can't do their job, talk to them about it and make sure it gets corrected.
Thank you very much. The next question is, how do you view the role of professional staff in the union, and what do you think is their relationship with student organizations? And we'll start with Nick.
So I know throughout the union, a lot of times you can have a professional advisor, whether it's through SARPs or through your club having their own advisor, and it's useful. Whether it's some of the martial arts club having an instructor teach the class, maybe it's an outside assistant coming in to check the genie list for lights to make sure that things are up to code. Professionals provide an outside view of things that we really can't get a hold of ourselves sometimes. I believe that they're a great tool to be utilized, just like the admins in the admin office. It's something that we can use to better ourselves and to build a more perfect union. Sometimes you're not going to use a hammer to put a lag bolt in. I want to make sure that clubs know when to use the right tools and right resources, make sure that they understand how they can utilize those professional advisors and staff members.
Thank you. Greg?
I'd like to thank RPI TV for making my answer to a very similar question on the last debate as popular as it is. And I firmly believe that students should be the focus of the student union. If there is a job that students want to do and are able to do, students should be the one filling it. There are cases where we need someone who's going to be here year after year that knows how things have been done in the past to provide a reason for why decisions were made. But in the large majority of cases, a student could do the job just as well, if not better. I want to make sure that students are given the opportunity to fill all of the roles that they'd like to pick up important skills, and to make sure that the focus of the Rensselaer Student Union is on the Rensselaer students that are members of the union.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the online forum, and it is, what are some items that you want to cut from the budget of the union? And please give concrete examples, and we'll start with Greg.
Okay, things that I want to cut wholesale from the budget. That's a tricky one, because I can't just say, I want to make sure that this club is off campus now. I can't say, I want to get rid of the bookstore, even if I feel like the bookstore is not the best use of the space. Everything has to be considered in the case of, do students use it or not? Could whatever we spend the money on elsewhere be more beneficial? In the case of the bookstore, maybe there are students that depend on the bookstore to use it as their only way of getting books. And if that's the case, then it's a service we should continue to provide. But we have to look at how exactly we can take the money we do have and use it to benefit students in the best way possible.
Well, the Still at Greg, if we want to rephrase the question, we can say reduce. Are there some areas of the budget that you prefer to have reduced, like concrete example-wise?
Okay. Well, I think I've spoken enough about the bookstore now. One of the services that I hear phrased in an interesting way from current members of student government is we have a lawyer available for student use. And while I'm not saying that we don't need a lawyer, it seems like it would be useful. Some people complain that students don't use it and that they're not aware, and I don't see that as the case. I feel like if we could reduce the amount of hours he's here, if he works somewhere else, so that he can be available for when students need him or her, I actually don't know, then that would be more beneficial than paying someone full-time. And that we need to make sure that if students don't use a resource, we don't make it the fault of the students for not utilizing the resource, but instead looking, how can we provide the services students do want?
Thank you very much. And then Nick, the question of what are some things that you would cut or reduce in the budget?
So right now, I don't have a shopping list of things off the top of my head that need to be cut directly from the union. It's a much larger discussion that I believe I can't do justice here. However, one thing that I want to look at that actually was looked into for this year's UAR, first time in a while as far as I've been able to gather, is club returns. Now, everybody always knows the joke about a federal institution needing to go out and spend a ton of money so that they can keep their budget next year. And I don't want returns
Are made. I want to release regular drafts of important documents like the union activity report. I want to make sure that students are able to see every step of the process along the way to make sure that they really understand what's going on. And transparency and communication isn't just putting everything out there, but making sure that we have adequate, important summaries, because students at RPI are very busy. If they just want to read the one paragraph summary, here's what happened, and then they can look at the whole details for themselves, that's a lot more important than just putting the documents out there.
Thank you very much. This next question is from the RPI TV feed, and it's for Nick. How would you respond to being called an opportunist for jumping back into the election at the height of a controversy?
So something that a lot of people may not know is that I was actually campaigning to be on the ballot before GM Week, and I had received about 450 nominations, give or take, of the 600 needed to be, recognized on the ballot. Unfortunately, a family emergency came up, I believe around Tuesday. Yeah, it was Tuesday morning, early morning, where I got a call. Things came up at home, and it was an emergency that I had to deal with. It was unfortunate. Some I'm not happy about. But following Tuesday, I got a call from home. Things turned out all right and things were resolved. Now, I understand the timing can concern people, but I was working with UPAC lights from 7 a.m. Wednesday morning straight through 11:30 p.m. And unfortunately, the only time I was near enough to a computer to announce it was during the debates. It was simply a coincidence of a long day of work, and I'm not trying to take opportunity of anything that may have happened. What happened.
Thank you very much for your response. The next question is from the online feed. It's for both candidates. Recently, the administration added an additional fee for grad students without any warning. How will you work with the administration so that when they are making a change, student input is taken into account and that these changes are communicated to the student body? And we'll start with Greg.
I think this goes into my answer to a previous question about why communication with administration officials is so important. Because if we don't have open communication lines, they will never come to us for our input on additional fees. We need to make sure that the administration respects us as student leaders and that we show them the same amount of respect so that they can bring these issues to us before they have to go out to the student body. That we can say this, the students will not be happy if you impose this fee. We suggest that you guys don't do it. And I believe that if we have this sort of communication, this is the best way to prevent preventing things from becoming a surprise too late.
Thank you. Nick?
Like I said previously, I plan on presenting myself to the administration as a mature adult and representing the student body as best I can. I'm going to embody the proactivity that I wish to inspire in the e-board by reaching out to the administration and putting myself right there in the process, making sure that I have an idea what's going on whenever possible and communicating that back as quickly and efficiently as possible to the students so that they know what's going on. I do not plan to accept any kind of shutout of that manner. I believe that we can speak to them as people, as partners, as equals, and work to make sure that communication is open and fluid and that our voices are heard.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what specific student needs, not club needs, but student needs, do you feel are not currently being met by the student union that could be met? And we'll start with Nick.
So, in terms of student needs, one of the big things that comes to mind right away is a lot of times it feels that things just aren't quite presented to us when we need them. Sometimes you have to jump through the hoops to get what you need, whether it's academically, personally, trying to figure out information, book a room, what have you. I believe that though the access to those resources and the facilities is something that I can work towards during my term to make sure are more available to students, so that they can get what they need when they need it without having to jump through or hoops or cut through red tape or go around the bush and try and figure out where am I going next. Make sure the channels to swim are clear and make sure that the resources are apparent.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on.
Do I get to answer that question?
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like one of the biggest things that students aren't having their needs met for is the respect for their opinion, that they feel like they don't have an impact on the process. Important decisions are made without them, that they have to learn after the fact that something happened. They can't say beforehand, this is how we feel about it, and then the student government officials act accordingly. I want to make sure that that's changed through plans I've already mentioned a number of times. I'm not going to keep repeating the same thing, but I just want to make sure that students are the guiding force of the Bartell administration and e-board. Yeah. Those are student voices being heard right now.
Thank you very much. So next we'll go into, say, a little bit of an example here. Suppose the activity fee falls short by about $100,000. Name 3 or so specific ways which you propose how to make up this budgetary deficit. And we'll start with Greg.
I think we need to look at the things that are being funded as those sort of stretch goals. We need to make sure that we're looking at those first, and those are the first items we cut. I want to make sure that just because we made some budgeting error, we didn't get as much money as we expected, that necessary funds aren't cut from any activity, any club, anything. I want to make sure that the e-board representatives already know these are the things that we funded because we had a little bit extra money, and those are the ones that we can cut back on.
Thank you very much. Nick?
So when I was the vice president of finance for my fraternity, Sigma Phi Epsilon, what I was given about a month into my term was a 15 grand deficit that I had to deal with. Now, it's not quite as big as the union scale, but what worked best for us and what I believe would work best is having the communication with the clubs to figure out exactly what money is needed, what money isn't needed, and how we can work around that. Looking at returns, looking at past spending, looking at what's gone on, and then turning that eye to the future. Being able to plan around that, and maybe we have a year where we fall short, and we have to make that up. We have to pull up the slack and make sure that the sales are still full. We need to work to make sure that money is going where it needs to, and if things need to be tight, making sure that clubs can still operate to their maximum potential, still have everything they need, while making sure that the union is absolutely still afloat.
Thank you very much. Let's see. The next question from the online stream for both of you is, what do you view as the roles of the executive board and the student senate with respect to the Rensselaer Union? And we'll start with Nick.
I believe what the Senate what most works for is for the students, making sure that their voices are heard through policy, through making sure that things get done. And they work in conjunction with the e-board to make sure that the finances are taken care of, that the organizations have the funds they need, and to make sure that the money is where it needs to go. Both bodies represent the students and make sure that their embodiment through the student union is heard. Their voices are clear, resounding, and are present throughout all representation possible. They are the voice of the students. They are chosen to lead, and they are chosen to bring about the best changes possible for the student body.
Thank you. Greg?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't think I heard it right the first time.
Hold on one second. The exact wording was, what do you view as the roles of the executive board and the student senate with respect to the Rensselaer Union?
Well, I see them as sort of the legislative and executive branches. The executive board, I bet you can guess which one that is, and then the Senate is the legislative. The Senate sets the policies, it sets the rules and procedures, makes most of the committees, and decides these are the things that we're going to do that are going to affect the students. And then the executive board has the job to fund that, to make sure that student needs are being met, that resources are being allocated appropriately, and that we're working to do the things that the students want to do.
Thank you very much. The next question is, for those that did not vote for you in the first election, why should they vote for you in the runoff? And we'll start with Greg.
Well, I really hope that you've looked at my positions on the issues, you've looked at Dvorak's, and you feel that mine represent your interests and your needs better than his. If you felt that someone else was better than me in the first one, I hope I've convinced you that I'm making every step to fill in the gaps in my knowledge, to make sure I'm representing students at every step of the process. And those are the reasons I'd like you to vote for me. If you still feel that my opponent, Nick Dvorak, is the better candidate, then I hope that you vote for him.
Nick?
So I understand that one of the big issues that came up with me is a lot of people didn't know how to spell my name. So I'm on the ballot this time. Only a click, not a spelling. However, beyond that, in a more serious note, I want to make sure students got informed and believe, as I believe, that I'm the best shot this union's got. I want to make sure that they know that I'm well experienced, that I'm well informed, and that I can do the job well and get it done right. This is a role that I will be passionate and committed to through and through, without a doubt. I hope that the union students can understand that they can see that, and that they can believe in me to be their next president of the union.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the audience, and is specifically for Greg. You talk about an appeals board, which would require a referendum vote from the student body to change the Constitution. Why not use the Senate, which was intended to serve as a check on the executive board?
Well, this starts off with a misconception. I want to make it very clear that I intend to do this without a constitutional change. It will be an executive board bylaw change, still has to be approved by the Senate, but it's not a direct vote of the students. I want to work with the judicial board. I want to get their input on how to do it. I want to get the input of the Senate to make sure I'm not overstepping my bounds. I want to make sure that everybody understands the purpose and how to do it. I don't have all the details right now. I have general ideas. I want to make sure that no one oversteps power, but at the same time we're putting checks on it. But I want to make sure that the purpose is still functional. And I do believe that this can be done without a constitutional amendment, and I believe it can be done well without it. The exact details are to be determined.
And then as a follow-up, just for a rough estimate, how long do you think it will be until the appeals board is in full effect and ready to go?
I really hope that it will be in place and ready to make decisions at this current budgeting cycle that I will be presiding over if elected.
Thank you very much. We'll move back to a question for both candidates, and it is, what is your position on alumni members of union organizations? And we'll start with Nick.
Not 100% sure I understand the question. Do you mean alumni involvement or?
Yes.
All right. So active alumni are absolutely wonderful to have as a perspective. I know for Lights, we call him Dad, but Jeff Morton was an individual who came back to Lights and worked tirelessly both this year and as he was leaving Rensselaer last semester to make sure that shows were run right and that our current equipment chair as well as our other chairs were taught well. Alumni are important because they bring back the perspective that we need. They teach us of what has been done in the past, and they can show us things we may not know about. And they can provide guidance from a perspective that we simply can't have having entered the real world and having gone away from college, not worrying about where the party is next weekend, but rather when the paycheck's coming in.
Thank you very much. Greg?
I believe that alumni that are active in clubs should be supported and be respected. Almost every club I've been to, whether it's WRPI, RPI TV, RPI players, even RPI Sec, as people that come back after they've graduated, and they share their experiences. Clubs can't operate in a bubble. You're only here for 4 or so years, and then you graduate, hopefully. And if we have alumni that come back, they can provide perspective. They can say, this is how we did it when I was here. This is how you want to look into doing it. And they provide knowledge that maybe current students don't have. And they provide useful experience and guidance to the current members of clubs, and they should be supported.
Thank you very much. The next question is, in what ways do you want the union marketed to incoming and prospective students? And do you think that it is a point of drawing potential students? And we'll start with Greg.
I would really hope that it is important in drawing students to RPI because there aren't many entirely student-run unions left in the country. RPI is one of the very few schools that still has one, and I believe it's very important that students understand if you don't like the way things are, you have a voice in it. You can talk to student government officials and they'll take your opinion into consideration. If you have the time and interest, you can run for those positions yourself. I'm coming in as a complete outsider. I've never held an elected position in the union before, and here I am with a very good shot of becoming the next president of the union. I have opinions, and I believe that I can act on those opinions to make positive changes to benefit students, and if incoming students realize that their voices will be heard at RPI, I think it's going to increase their odds of coming to this school.
Thank you very much. Nick?
I believe that the union is, without a doubt, an incredible selling point for RPI. I know when I was here working for the Accepted Students Day, talking to students that would be coming in for the next freshman class, about how the fact that I worked with a concert for a band that had come over from Albany and was going on a tour around the state, blew the students' mind. When I talked to them about how I had joined my Greek organization and the fun things that I had done and the way I had given back to the community, and how I had found that part of the way through the student union, because that's where Meet the Greeks was. It's a great selling point. Your voice can be heard here. You can be represented here. This student union is the student body. It is a physical manifestation of the Rensselaer community and is an absolute selling point to RPI. I know coming here for myself was an incredible decision, and I haven't regretted it for one moment. And I hope that other students can see that. And I believe that by coming through the union, seeing the great things that students have done here is an absolute sell and an absolute asset to have.
Thank you very much. The next question, and it's from the online forum, is there has been talk that union administrative budgets have gotten out of control. How do you plan to reverse this trend? And we'll start with Nick.
So for the UAR, there was a bit of concern with the union admin budget, and it was a bit of misinformation that was thrown around. Now, some salaries were shifted from the Mueller Center to the union budget. There were a few one-time costs. And when you look at the UAR, a lot of things that fall under the title of admin don't have direct impacts from those people sitting up in the office on the third floor. Things that are included are like Big Red Freakout or special events budgets, things that support clubs all around campus but are put under an umbrella simply for bookkeeping purposes and allocation. With that said, there's always a system of checks. There's always a balance that needs to be sought, making sure that the admins are getting the funds they need but not abusing it, not taking advantage of something that may be sitting decrepit that we may not know about. That's not acceptable. A balance needs to be sought, and I believe that I'm going to find that.
Thank you very much. Greg?
Well, it's true that there are certain one-time shifts in how exactly things are budgeted that makes the administrative budget look even bigger than it is. It is still too big. I want to make sure that we aren't hiring new administrative staff, that students are being put into the jobs that they're able and willing to do, and make sure that the focus of all the money the union gets is to spend it on benefiting students. And I believe that adding new administrative positions doesn't add to that. It hurts that. I want to make sure that students are the ones that are having their money being used for them instead of on administrative staff. If we can, get rid of people, if that means not hiring new people, then I'm all for that. I want to reduce that administrative budget as much as possible.
Thank you very much. The next question is, in the last 5 years, the activity fee has risen nearly $100 per student. What can you do to slow or stop the increase of the fee? And we'll start with Greg.
Well, the activity fee is very high, I'll admit. Even if it's proportionally small relative to tuition, still any amount that we can decrease is great. While I don't know if a sizable decrease is possible, I want to keep it from going up through reducing administrative costs, as previously mentioned, making sure that we're making sure our income sources are as optimized as possible. If we can make the bookstore make more money, that'd be great. And ideally, if we can bring in more revenue, then we don't have to take it from students, if we can bring it from other sources. And that's the best way to make sure that the activity fee doesn't have to increase.
Thank you very much. Nick?
So an interesting piece of information that I've found out as I've learned more about this position is that the activity fee is capped at a 3% increase per year. Can't go up beyond that. But I understand the concerns, and it's not cheap. I know I pay for myself to go here. I know I know it's a struggle month to month to make sure that I have the money to get the bills paid, and I always do. Promise, my credit score is good. But going back to that, we may not be able to bring it down right away, but I believe through my plan to make 4-year plans with clubs, make sure that the future is looked forward to and that planning is done to properly allocate money evenly and fairly across the coming years will help to make it so that we don't have any big sways or big fluctuations that we'll need to recoup with year to year in a budget. More consistency with planning, more well-rounded financial planning is going to make it so that we don't have to rely on that 3% maximum year to year. It's going to allow us to work to increase it what we need. Not to the maximum, not to push the limit.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. With the increase of international students, what do you want to do to make sure international students feel more involved and not isolated? And we'll start with Nick.
So I know I've worked with quite a good number of clubs that are actually focused on international students. I know with UPEC Lights we did a mid-autumn festival last semester. We did CASA hosted an event a couple weeks ago. I believe that there's a great set of clubs and organizations that truly represent international students. But beyond that, the student union is a representation of the student body. If they're here, I believe that they hold a stake in that representation. I want to make sure that there's no barriers to them, not just through student government, but also to the clubs, making sure that the word gets out where they can get involved. I know with Light specifically, we have a lot of international students that come in interested in working a show, figuring out what goes on campus, and getting involved with the events. Working with clubs to make sure those barriers are dropped is a big thing for me.
Thank you very much. Greg?
When I was doing my service hours as a candidate working at the finale, I sat next to a very nice girl that asked me a very similar question, and my answer then is the same as it is now. I don't know what it's like to be an international student. I'm not one, and I don't know exactly what I can do. I feel like the biggest problem is probably a cultural one, but I don't know exactly what I can do to fix that. I invite international students to give me their suggestions, what clubs can do, and I want to reach out to them in order to get their opinions because they know best what's good for them. But I feel like clubs in general want to have as many members as possible, and whether they're international or otherwise, it isn't really the problem. There isn't a barrier there. It's just making sure that all clubs want to reach out, that all the students that want to get involved can. And I invite any other suggestions students have.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the online forum, and specifically from Joshua Rosenfeld. And he says that current union policies do not allow for religious or political clubs to be funded by the union. Are you open to a discussion regarding the funding of such organizations? And we'll start with Greg.
I am open to a discussion about it. However, I don't know if it's realistically possible to fund religious or political organizations. Every club wants to have money. I want to make sure that students are being represented. If they want to have an organization, they can have it. But I don't know if that necessarily means we can fund it. As is currently in place, you can have a religious or political organization, be recognized by the union, have access to some of the services that we provide, but to fund it is different because how do you go about doing it in an equitable manner so that no one religion, no one political affiliation is preferenced over the other? And these are things that could be discussed in a discussion, and I would love to have that conversation, but I can't say, yes, we're going to fund religious clubs right off the bat.
Thank you. Nick?
So unfortunately, Greg's right. There's no simple answer to this question. And a lot of times it can be turned into a veritable Pandora's box of different opinions and different proponents and people that oppose it. With that said, I'm part of religious institutions on campus. I'm part of the Knights of Columbus and the Newman Catholic Fellowship. I understand the difficulties from that side, especially with recruiting new members and getting dues paid and funding. I understand it's hard. But with that said, it's part of a much larger discussion. It's something I'm open to, but that I approach with an air of objectivity and hesitation. It's something I believe is a bit of more of a long-term goal, and something that, if put forward, would be looked at thoroughly and, without a doubt, reviewed. And I would like to have an open, honest, and mutual discussion with those interested. But it has to be done right. And the proper channels have to be looked at.
So sort of a follow-up, in a controversial issue such as this, if funding was allowed or implemented, how would you propose to ensure that such funding is distributed fairly without bias or discrimination? We'll start with Nick.
So one of the things that I would look at first is who exactly is coming forward about this. Figure out what they want, what they need, and take that into account, and then have a larger discussion. Get the perspectives. Have a good debate if necessary. Have a good, mature discussion about what exactly is desired going forward. And from there, we're going to make it clear and concise what's allowed, what's not allowed, and how we're going to allocate things. It's not a simple discussion. It's not a simple problem. It's something that needs to be looked at objectively, and it needs to be looked at thoroughly.
Thank you very much. Greg?
If we were to fund religious organizations, which is not a promise, I feel the only reasonable way we could do it would be to fund it based off of membership, that we provide X dollars per member to be used in whatever way the club wishes. Because if we were to try and treat it like any other club where they have operating expenses that need to be paid, where they have, stretch goals to pay for, then there could be open to bias. Why does this club get X dollars per member? This club gets Y. Are you favoriting one religion over the other? So I feel like some sort of set per member dollar amount for religious organizations is the best way to go with that.
All right, thank you very much. So that will conclude this part of the debate. Now we're going to open the floor up for audience questions. There's a mic. I hit that. Up there in the front, if any of you have a question, just line up in a reasonable fashion and ask it to the candidates.
Ooh, it's a race.
Hello, candidates. All right. My question is, what does the e-board do but distribute funds equitably? So if religious clubs want to get funding, isn't the e-board do just what they do everything else and just distribute funds in a fair fashion? I mean, what's the difference in with being religious or not? They can still get funds equitably because that's what the e-board does.
Are you asking specifically about religious clubs in this case then?
Yes, yes, that's what I'm asking.
Okay. Well, it's not quite like any other club because something like WRPI, the players, we have facilities we operate, we have equipment. I feel like a religious club wouldn't necessarily have those needs. We can't say, hey, we need to fund this or else we cease to operate as a club. A religious club just exists by virtue of having members. So that's the reason I feel like it would have to be a per member dollar amount.
So with religious organizations, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
Well, I was just going to ask, does that answer your question? I don't know if that's quite what you're getting at.
I mean, I disagree respectfully. I think that religious clubs operate by offering amenities that they do currently offer, public services, if you were. And other cultural clubs do the same things, and they basically operate very similarly. If they're under the same guidelines, they shouldn't have...
I'm sorry, but do you have like a specific question?
I'm sorry. Yeah, my question to follow up that would be then how they differentiate themselves from cultural clubs. If it's the same operating-wise, it should be the same guidelines, wouldn't it?
Well, that's one of those things I'm going to have to defer to a later discussion because it's a tricky subject. I don't have all the answers for you right now. I want to hear your opinions. I want to hear the opinions of every student, and I hope that you'd come to an open forum we'd have about it, but I can't say anything right now.
So you'd have an open forum for it?
If elected, I would be happy to hold one.
And I completely agree. It's a larger discussion that needs to be had. With that said, one of the big issues that approaches this is just the simple subjectivity of the topic. What is religion to a lot of people is an incredibly subjective topic, and I'm sure myself and any individual at RPI are going to have differing opinions. It's tricky. I'm not going to tell you that it's a simple yes or no, yay or nay situation. But with that said, it's something that I believe anybody that truly believes the student union represents all the students is open to hearing. But I think myself and Greg want to make it clear that it's part of a much larger discussion and it can be worked towards, but we need to make sure we do it right.
So you'd also have a forum for this?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
How you guys doing? So the activity fee is somewhere in the order of $650 for undergrads. there's certain clubs where the per member, they get more than that. Do you think that's fair, and what's your stance on that?
You're welcome to start.
All right. So with the fact that some clubs have more subsidy than others, I know that the Union E-Board and the PU have always tried to make sure that it's fairly included. Now, it's not quite feasible with 255 clubs here at RPI to specifically tailor an activity fee that goes out to all students to each club, whether they are involved with one or without. I wish that that might be the case, but it would take over a year to make a budget, and unfortunately that's just something we can't sustain. With that said, it's definitely something that can be looked at. It's something that, if elected, I hope you or anybody else interested would come talk to me about. I want to hear your perspective. I want to hear any student's opinion. I plan on continuing Aaron's idea of office hours. Something I've kicked around is making sure that I do pub talks. Big P, big U, little B talks. I'm 21, and I know most grad students are too. Come have a beer with me in the pub. Come hang out. Come talk to me. I'm a person. I want to hear your opinions. And I understand that's another big topic that can be broached, the split activity fee between grads and undergrads, and I don't want to draw this away from the question.
Yeah. As soon as they lower the drinking age, I'll be happy to have pub talks. Until then, we'll be in the student government suite. As far as the original question about clubs that get more than the activity fee per member, it'd be weird for me to say anything other than I agree with it, because I believe WRPI is one of those clubs. We have small members but huge operating costs, and we need more than that to operate. But that's because the only people that get a service from WRPI aren't only the members of, it's all the members of the student campus that listen to the station. It's all the people that go to a Playhouse play. I haven't seen their budget, but I imagine that they get more money too. Because when you provide a service and you have all this equipment that lets you do things, you're providing benefits beyond just the people that do the service themselves. If students say, hey, I'm completely sick of this, I want to make sure not a single penny of my money goes to supporting this club I hate, then I think they need to consider how mean-spirited they're being, but I'll look at it, and I want to make sure that their views are represented well, too.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hey guys. So my biggest question, whoa. So my biggest question for both of you is, you both know your greatest weakness is the fact that you have not been involved in student government before. You don't have a ton of knowledge of the executive board. A good example would be that grad student question from earlier about a cap. You do have a cap. It's in the Constitution. You have to have a grad representative, and then you have a grad council representative that the council picks themselves. So this type of information you don't know because you haven't been experienced. How do you plan on making this not a weakness? How do you plan on overcoming this so that you can be effective even though you don't have that background?
Rock, paper, scissors. I had the last one.
Okay, well, I guess I'll go first then. I honestly believe that my lack of insider experience is a strength, not a weakness. I provide outside experiences that give me a different perspective than if I had just spent my time on the e-board. One of the quotes that I hear from my last debate is, people like that I said that policy and procedure can be learned, honor and integrity cannot, and I still completely stand by that. I can learn how to do the job. I can learn exactly how many members of each cap are on the e-board. I can learn how to do the job on the day-to-day. I need to focus on being as good of a leader as I possibly can, and then everything else follows. I can learn it on the job.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I live and breathe by my Google Calendar. Heck, I block out times to eat and sleep on it. You can ask any of my brothers. With that said, within the next week, I plan to hit the ground running. I have a list of people I need to talk to, a list of information I need to get, and I'm sure that I'm going to be back-to-back with meetings without a doubt. If elected, I plan on getting into the position and making sure that I'm not looking around figuring out, what do I do from here? I want to hit the ground running. I want to make sure I have no gap in my knowledge. And I believe that those who have held responsibility of the position before will absolutely be there to help me and support me in the new role.
Okay, next question.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good.
Don't worry, that's not my actual question. So, Just like the Senate, the executive board does a lot of its work through committees. How do you plan as president of the union to make sure those committees are staying on top of their work, and since they're the ones that are going to be doing things at a lot lower level, closer to students?
So I know in the past I've worked with large teams before managing people, and I understand in this kind of situation, micromanaging probably isn't the best way to go, unless I want to run around 24 hours a day and never sleep. And I do like to sleep every once in a while, I promise. I want to make sure that we're working from the bottom up. With e-board reps, it's a personal relationship. I'm going to be working to make sure that they know what's going on. And with that, going down to the committees, checking in, making sure that they have their meetings with me, that they have their meetings with who they're accountable to, and doing a regular check-in. It takes 2 weeks to set a habit into the human system. Simple as that, good or bad. Set a good example, hit the ground running, and have a good habit from the start.
I believe that good people do good work. If we pick good executive board members, and I say we because I want to solicit suggestions from club officers, from athletic representatives, from everybody. If we pick good people, that they will do the job well, and I don't think that they'll need a lot of micromanaging to stay on track. I believe that everybody I would pick would be as focused on doing the job as well as possible, and they don't really have an incentive to go off track. I think that the idea of keeping focused is they present regularly to the e-board, hey, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it. And those could be things to be discussed at an open forum, at a town hall meeting. You know, this is what I, as president of the union, am doing. This is what the committees of the executive board are doing. And if students say, hey, it sounds like such and such committee hasn't done anything for the last 6 weeks, then they're welcome to say that, and we'll look into it a little bit more closely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hi. Sorry about that. How do you ensure that you pick e-board representatives fairly? There is a finite and small number of e-board representatives, but 255 clubs on campus. How do you make sure that you pick people that will adequately represent all of the clubs on campus?
Sorry, I lost track.
I don't remember who
What's
answered the
your
last
call?
one first, so doesn't.
Flip a coin?
We'll just say Nick.
So I understand from Greg's platform, he wants to have clubs put forward their e-board reps and bring suggestions. Now, I think that clubs can bring from within great students, whether that be their e-board rep. I don't think I agree with that completely, but I do like the idea of having good students that their clubs believe in them to lead their student government. They will bring about excellent people. I plan on having e-board reps that are well-knowledged and know what's going on. I want a fair representation of not just juniors or sophomores, making sure that there's grads, making sure that there's freshmen. I know that the balance is preset and prescribed. But I want to make sure that I'm getting the best of what we have at Rensselaer. I want to make sure that the barriers drop so that the average student can make sure that they get their name out there and try and get involved. Because maybe they may not know their potential. Maybe they may have a great amount of experience from high school that they just want to apply if they're an incoming freshman. Dropping those barriers is important. I believe that I can personally look out and seek out the best members of Rensselaer to provide for this union the best representation I can find.
Thank you, Greg.
I believe that the question about how we pick e-board representatives to represent every club is going to be solved by my idea of taking representatives from club suggestions. There will, of course, be an open call to go with it because maybe clubs don't suggest, you know, the required number of e-board representatives. But I feel like at the same time, we're not going to have 255 different people suggested by clubs. Maybe half of the clubs, if we're lucky, are going to nominate anybody at all. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of overlap. Just by human nature, the popular people are the ones that know the most people that will recommend them. So I don't think that'll be an issue. Of course, I will interview as many applicants as possible to make sure that they're good people and that they're passionate not only about the club that suggested them, but about the student activities as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hey guys, so this is directed more specifically at Greg, but Nick, feel free to answer as well. You've mentioned want to cut administrative costs, and specifically you mentioned earlier in the debate not wanting to hire any new administrative staff. As current treasurer of a large club on campus, the ski club, I've personally dealt with every single person in the union admin office, some of whom I see on a daily basis to help keep the club running with all that we do. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about why you feel the administrative staff or budget should be cut and why no new hires should be made.
Well, I think you kind of answer the second part yourself. You know, if you meet with them regularly, they help you keep the club on track. Do you really need another person to help you out with that? Do you need another face to see every single day? Because I'm sure your schedule is as limited as mine. You don't have a whole lot of time. Cutting the administrative budget is, of course, tricky. I'm not going to say, hey, we're going to get rid of so-and-so because I don't know. Maybe they provide services to students that I haven't talked to. And I want to make sure that everybody has an involvement there. I just want to make sure that students are the focus and that the administrative costs don't go beyond what is required to do those services. I'm thinking one of the examples I gave last time is having professional videographers do the job that RPI TV is doing right now. And that's the sort of administrative cost I want to cut down on, hiring outside professionals to do the jobs that students can do. Because students simply can't do a lot of the jobs that the members of the administrative office do.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
So what's the Okay. So what's the timetable for addressing the issue of religious funding on campus?
All right. So, if after elected the topic is brought up right away, I can address it right away. The fact of the matter is, as things are presented and as issues are brought up, we can be reactionary. We can make sure that we're listening. Now, I might ask for a grace period so I can make sure that the e-board reps that we're selected are kind of brought into the process and aren't being blindsided. However, conversation can still happen even before that. It's something that I know I'm open to, and from the sounds of it, I think Greg's open as well. We can make sure that the talking is there and when it needs to be.
This semester or next semester?
As soon as necessary.
Okay. Also, what's your opinion on like support groups for students with chronic disease on campus?
Sorry, is that directed at me?
I don't care either.
I don't know if you want me to answer the first question first or...
Yeah, you can do the first question first.
Well, first one is you obviously want to have this discussion before you have to submit your budget so that you could get funding if it's available to you. So I believe that if we do that at the beginning of the fall semester, that will give plenty of time. We have the discussion, we figure out what we're going to do about it, and that still gives you time to get an e-board rep, to meet with them, to figure out exactly how we're going to fund it. Second question, what exactly do you want to know about chronic disease support groups?
I mean, are you interested in helping other students who just discovered their chronic disease?
Well, this is an interesting question because we've already met about this well before I was running. I have a chronic disease myself, so I'm, of course, very interested in this subject. I don't know if necessarily they have to be union funded, but if we have the ability to have them be associated with the union, to provide rooms for them, I believe it provides a service that maybe a small percentage of students need, but it can make a dramatic improvement in the lives of those students. So.
That's a perspective I personally don't have. However, I know that something I want is to make sure that resources are available to all students whenever they need it. With that said, I know one thing that the union does is that there's a bit of advice that goes on if you need something, who to talk to. I want to make sure that that's clear. If there's an interest for that, there's channels to swim to make it happen. And I believe that it's absolutely possible. And if students are interested and passionate about it, I can see no reason why it may not happen. But if the need is there and the passion is there, I think you can see results.
Thank you. And then for the next question is from an audience member who prefer not to be identified. It is towards Greg Bartel. And it is, can you explain the judicial board case you brought over the last weekend, and what was your reasoning for doing so?
Sure. I feel like there's been a lot of misunderstanding about why I brought that case, and it's a question I honestly expected to hear earlier in the night. I want to be very clear that I had only good intentions at heart. I felt like the Rules and Elections Committee had not been acting properly, had not been acting fast enough, had not been bringing sanctions against members of a stronger union consistently and repeatedly throughout the election cycle. And I simply wanted to bring it to the J Board to see if they felt the same way, and if so, what actions should be taken. Of course, that changed a little bit after the whole post-ring scandal came out, and there was a lot of people that suspected I simply wanted to keep Nick Dvorak off of the ballot. And I assure you that none of that is true. I supported Dvorak being on the ballot the whole time. I believe I met with Dvorak in person to tell him as much, that even if my case had gone through, that the elections had been invalidated, I would still want to have him on the ballot. While I'm disappointed that the J Board disagreed with me, that they feel that these allegations I made were not true, I respect that, and I'm moving on with my life, and I hope others do the same. So.
Thank you. Next question.
How you doing, guys?
Before you start talking, are you going to Sith lightnings at me or something?
Don't worry. Only
Volcano
if you
powers.
answer poorly. All right, so the Student Senate, as you may be aware, voted down the activity fee the first time it was presented this year. And many of the concerns that were cited was a lack of general communication both with the Senate and with the student body at large. In your role as PU, how do you plan to increase that communication on both of those fronts while maintaining the executive board's need to have a productive and efficient budgeting process?
I guess I'll start. So, one thing that I definitely want to leverage with this is the Senate e-board liaison that I know is present, and I believe it was Shoshana for this past year. Now, I know she works pretty hard. She works tirelessly as far as I've seen. With that said, I want to make sure to emphasize that. One of the big things that I'm pushing is making sure that information is present, palatable, and simple. And I believe that's going to be helpful for the Senate, and I believe that through the liaison, that can be a two-way street. By having simple, quick communication between both sides, it'll improve relations and make sure that things are more clearly defined. I know one of the big misconceptions that came about when the UAR and activity went fee fiasco kind of happened was what was happening with the administrative budgets and the information pertaining to that. Once that was cleared up, everything seemed to go through all right. So making sure that communication is open, simple, and straightforward is something I want to work for.
I think, once again, communication is the obvious answer here. If we make it very clear every step of the process to every member of the student body, Senate included, this is what we're doing as members of the executive board. This is where we're going to go with it. If you have any input, please tell us about it. I believe that that's going to prevent any sort of future collisions down the road.
One quick follow-up then. Do you believe in a UAR that is detailed and comprehensive for those who wish to dive into a deep amount of information, or a UAR that is streamlined so that the average student who may not be as in-depth can access it?
Why not both? Why not have the in-depth one for the people that want the details, put every single thing on it, and then at the beginning we've got a couple of pages saying these are the highlights, this is what the new fee is, this is where it's going, in 3 or 4 pages.
If I can harken back to something I actually said earlier, is the pyramid setup. I definitely support both, and it's something that I want to keep up in not just the UAR but all communications with the e-board. At the top, there's the quick and simple, straightforward, hopefully personal cover letter that's going to accompany the UAR, followed by simple charts, simple diagrams that the average student can look at, say, it's good in my book, and keep going. And at the bottom of that period, there's the nitty-gritty finances. There's all the tables, charts, and data that you could ever want and swim in for the rest of the year. That's what students can dig into. They can go down that rabbit hole, and if they so choose, access whatever they need to. We have nothing to hide from the students because we represent them clearly and have a full accountability to them.
So my final question, then I'm out of your hair here. Many people brought up a concern with the structure of the activity fee and the way it's allocated to different student demographics. Do you have any plans for evaluating this structure? Do you feel the structure needs to be evaluated? And if so, how would you go about it?
Can you be more specific? What concerns with the structure?
Certainly. Students have brought up the possibility of having an activity fee based on specific class year as opposed to just a graduate-undergraduate divide. Some have suggested having an off-campus versus on-campus. Some have suggested simply reevaluating the graduate portion. I believe that was what was specifically brought up in the Senate meetings.
While I don't have any definite plans, I feel like all of that should be considered, because if students don't get a benefit from all their money, then they don't want to pay for it. If we can reduce it for anybody that doesn't use services at the amount that we think they do, that would be great to look into it. I can't promise any sort of cut because I think that's what everybody's after. But I want to make sure that we're both able to fund the services people do use while not taking money from the people that don't use those services.
I know for a fact that we have an incredible amount of data here at the union by polling through students, opinions, and what have you of all of our undergraduate and graduate members. With that, everything can be considered, everything can be evaluated. I'm pushing for continuous improvement. If these are issues that are brought up, I can promise you we'll look into it. By starting the conversation about these topics early, we can set a timetable. We can have deliverables set up to work towards. Something to be considered? Absolutely. Something we'll work towards? I promise.
All right, thank you both, and good luck.
Thank you.
Question
Thank you.
just for the moderator. Do we anticipate a lot more questions? Because I
I
drank a
was-
lot of water.
I was going to cap it. I'd say we can have 2 more, and then we'll move to closing statements. Is that fair?
Sure.
We'll see.
Hi, I'd like to know what both of the candidates feel about political parties within the student union, because having served in student government back in the UK, I would have seen zero need whatsoever for a political party in my student union. And I really fail to see how a political party serves the students of RPI. It clearly only serves those within the party. What is your stance on such a thing?
I believe both my words and my actions have made it clear that I'm not a huge proponent of political parties. I see the current system in place as a way to take campaign expense limit from lower positions and divert them towards the more prolific races, GM and PU. And I feel like that provides an unfair advantage to the incumbents to get elected. And were it up to me, I would like to see political parties abolished altogether. Unfortunately, that's not under my control, but I hope that the issue is brought up to the relevant parties.
With political parties, I do understand why they come about, and I do understand what purpose they serve, because to be honest, if you have a group of students who are passionate and have an alignment of interests within student government and want to work together, I don't see why you would want to limit that. Whether they decide to label themselves a party or maybe just a group of mutual candidate assistants, I believe that they're working together for what they believe is best. That said, something gigantic like what came out of a stronger union may not be great. I know personally I've paid for everything out of my campaign out of my own pocket. I've had 2 candidate assistants, both of which helped me poster for about 30 minutes a couple weeks ago. I've been running this campaign from my side because I understand that this needs to be something that I want and that I know that I can serve the students best with. Political parties, for some, may be necessary because maybe they don't have the money or resources to pull everything together to run a proper campaign. But they definitely need to be put in check, and they definitely need to be done properly and not be abused.
If political parties definitely need to be put in check and they definitely need not be abused, how are you going to enforce that?
So that's not exactly directly under the e-board control. However, I believe that having the ear of the Grand Marshal from the PU position, working with the Senate, as I know Mr. Top Hat, I believe, is sitting back there. Working with them, having a mature discussion and making sure that the ideas are out there, I believe can work towards change.
Thank you.
No problem.
We'll take a quick second for Greg to come back, and then you're up next.
Are there bathrooms over there? I know there's some over there.
Yeah.
I have experience.
Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Pretty good. Kind of tired, but, you know, hanging in there. How are you?
Good, good.
Somebody in the back bet me I couldn't finish my picture, and I did. It's like a long car ride. You got to go before you start.
What is it like to have a beard?
The way that I've described it when this has been put forward before, it's like laying on Impact Hill on a warm, sunny day. The weather machine is in full effect. Tour campus guides are walking around backward, shouting to prospective students and parents. It's warm, it's comforting, and when that wind blows to bite, Mother Winter has nothing on this. yes, I did go to the gym today. Thank you, Ben. I never skip leg day. I'll never skip my responsibilities to students.
I apologize profusely.
It's all right, we had a conversation about my beard.
So my name is Shoshana. Was the Union Annual Report Chair. Having worked with the UAR this year, I noted that the calculation, the formulation of the activity fee hasn't been critically reviewed in a number of years. So starting with Greg, I would like you to tell me, and then on to Nick, if you could change over the formulation, how would you change it? And through that process, how would you bring in the student body and communicate and discuss those changes?
When you say structure of the activity fee, you mean kind of similar to what Craig was asking about, split by undergrad class here, graduate student, that sort of split? Or?
Yes, enrollment and participation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that the most important voices to get are the members of the affected groups. I want to take students that live off campus, those who live on, those that are grad students, those that are undergrad, and look at their various experiences and preferences. I want to make sure that they have their input in the process, because I don't know what it's like to be a graduate student. I'm an undergrad. I don't know what it's like to be a member of the class of 2018. I'm class of 2017. So they need to be able to be sure that their voices are being heard because they're the ones presenting it. I want to make sure that everybody's opinion is being looked at. Once again, I can't say how I would split it. It needs to be reviewed, and that's about it.
In an institution as complex as this one, and something as essential as a union activity fee, what it comes down to is everything should be critically reviewed, and I believe that having a revolving schedule for looking at things so that one year is not swamped over another is absolutely pertinent. With the activity fee, we could start there. We have an insane amount of data that we could leverage to look to see where the money's going, who's using it, and how to properly allocate it. Fairness is a big thing. We want to represent all of the student body as fairly as possible. Looking into everything that's been brought up is something that I would love to pursue. It's a project that could take my term. It's a project that could take a couple weeks. Until you start digging in, and I don't expect it to take a couple weeks. So once you start digging in, is when you can really look critically at something and evaluate how to make it as efficient as possible.
All right, thank you. So that will conclude the audience question session, and we'll move on to closing statements of 3 minutes in length. We'll start with Greg and then do Nick.
Well, I hope that my answers to questions have convinced you that I'm a good candidate, that I want to listen to students. I really believe that the most important reason to vote for me is this idea of the appeals board. I want to make sure that everybody that submits a budget gets a second pair of eyes to look at it if they'd like, to reevaluate if their needs have been met and evaluated in the most appropriate manner. I want to make sure that students are being asked for their opinion on every step of the process so that anybody who wants to get involved doesn't have to be surprised. Maybe we can't change how long you get for appeals, but we can tell you weeks in advance, this is when appeals start, this is when it needs to be submitted by, so that there's no surprises anywhere along the way. I want to utilize as many different mediums of communication as possible. I want to be on the internet, on Reddit, on Facebook. I want to meet in person. I'll have office hours. I'll have town hall meetings to meet with the student body in person. You can have my personal email in addition to the pu at rpi.edu one. You can have my own personal telephone number. You know, you want to call me up in the middle of the night, Greg, why aren't you doing this right now? I'll be happy to answer you, or listen to your voicemail because it's 2 in the morning. I want to make sure that new business managers and treasurers have a set of comprehensive instructions that tell them this is how to submit your budget, this is how to appeal it, this is where to go for more information, because right now the current guidelines are a bit long and dry. And I want to make sure that clubs and activities are the ones that are suggesting their e-board representatives so that we can have passionate people that understand and care about the things that they represent. Just like to finish off by saying thank you to everybody doing the debate, RPI TV for filming it, S&W for live tweeting it. I imagine the Poly is doing the same. And I thank all of you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
So before I begin, could we just get a round of applause for everybody that helped pull this off today? It was short notice, and I believe that it was pulled off excellently. With that said, I really hope that you guys have been able to gain an insight into who I am and what I'm running for. I really hope you've been able to be informed by this debate, and I hope my answers have been acceptable. If you have more questions, please talk to me. My contact info is there. If you want it and haven't been able to find it, come talk to me. You can have my phone number too. I wouldn't recommend calling me at 3 in the morning. I'm kind of a grumpy guy when you wake up. With that said, I believe that I am the best representative for this position. I believe that my wide breadth of experience, my strong background, and a passion and commitment to get the job done is what makes me the best choice for President of the Union, what makes me the best shot this union's got. Thank you.
I, of course, also want to thank you, Pack Lights. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier.
So with that being said, I'd like to thank everyone who came out to the 2015 Horace Kahn President of the Union debate. The election for the office of the President of the Union will take place tomorrow from 9 to 4 in both the Rensselaer Union West Lobby and the DCC Great Hall. Once again, I'd like to thank Horace Kahn of the class of 2011 for sponsoring the debate, RPI TV for organizing and hosting this event, UPAC Sound and Lights for their respective services, and all those who volunteered to make this event possible. So with that being that, good luck to both candidates and good night.